Hey guys, tonight we're hiking into the clouds literally. You're not in your bed anymore. You're thousands of feet above sea level, walking a winding trail carved into the side of a Peruvian cliff. Your breath fogs the crisp air, your fingers ache just a little, and there's that delightful crunch of gravel beneath your sandals. Weight sandals, oh yes, because you're now in the world of the Incas. And while you're fumbling with altitude, sickness, and trying to stop your llama from eating your emergency blanket again, someone in this ancient empire is sending a potato through the mail with string-dot packages, tax records, census counts, royal gossip, possibly even jokes about your haircut 10-coated in bundles of colored cords. It's equal parts postal service, memory palace, and art installation. And let's be clear, you probably wouldn't survive a week in this empire unless you could read, string, and run marathons before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're watching from, man. What time it is? Are you winding down, stuck in insomnia, or just vibing with some historical string theory? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Night falls fast in the Andes. You barely notice the sun slipping a wheat, just sort of vanishes. 1 minute you're blinking into brightness, and the next you're squinting into dusk, where every mountain looks like a sleeping god. You're walking the Qhapaq Ñan for Royal Road, and while you're convinced your calves have begun a quiet rebellion, the chosky runners of this world would already be halfway across the next peak, carrying news, orders, or yes sacks of freeze-dried potatoes. But before you get into the postal service of the past, pause for a second. Close your eyes, okay? Not really, and try to imagine a world without wheels. No horses, no carts, no written alphabet. The Inca Empire had none of those ands, still managed to control an area spanning 2,500 miles north to south. That's more than the distance from New York to Los Angeles. On foot, the Andes weren't just a backdrop, they were the stage. These mountains dictated where cities rose, where runners rested, even where potatoes would grow like tuberous miracles. Because the Inca didn't just survive the Andes, they turned them into a supply chain, and now you're following the footpath of someone who once delivered a quipu encoded message woven with meaning across terrain that looks like it belongs on a postcard labeled, "Absolutely do not hike here." You duck under a stone arch, one of many placed across this vast empire to mark distances, guide travelers, or serve as checkpoints. There's no GPS. Your directions are: look for the rock shaped like a condor, then turn left at the waterfall that sings at noon. Yet somehow it works. You pass by rest stops called tambos, which served as Inca motels/supply depots. No pool, but plenty of salted meat. No pillow mints, but if you're lucky, a fire-warmed potato. A soft wind whistles past, and for a second you swear it's carrying whispers. Or maybe it's your own heartbeat echoing off the canyon. Either way, the air smells like eucalyptus and stone, and you've still got miles to go. The Inca Trail was the circulatory system of the empire. Without it, there's no communication, no taxation, no empire at all. Think of it like the most intense mail route in human history, minus the stamps, but with bonus altitude sickness. You come to a bridge, a Qhapaq to be exact, made of grass. Yes, woven grass, stretched across a deadly chasm like something from a daredevil's fever dream. These bridges were rebuilt every year by local communities in a ceremony that was part architecture, part sacred ritual, and part group therapy session for anyone with vertigo. You take one cautious step onto the swaying cords. They creak. You suddenly become very aware of gravity. But you also realize this is how potatoes traveled. Swung across chasms, passed from runner to runner, like precious cargo. The Incas had over 4,000 varieties of potatoes. Purple ones, blue speckled ones that looked like tiny fists. They didn't just grow them, they worshipped them. Some were food, others were offerings. A few were even planted in royal gardens, like leafy little deities. You sit by a campfire that night, rubbing sore feet and chewing on a piece of Qhapaq freeze-dried potato that's been stomped, frozen, and sun-dried until it's basically the Andean version of astronaut food. Not exactly Michelin-starred, but when you're freezing at 12,000 feet, even crunchy potato ice is gourmet. A star blinks overhead, then another. Soon the sky becomes a map of glittering stories. The Incas didn't just look up and see constellations, shapes made not from stars, but from the inky shadows between them. One looks like a serpent, another a fox, all of them watching you from the void. Down below, the trail glows faintly in moonlight. You imagine the patter of bare feet who carried messages from Cusco to Quito without so much as a latte break. They ran for the Qhapaq Inca, the ruler believed to be a literal descendant of the sun. That's right, royalty with solar backing. No pressure. Now picture a runner arriving at a tambo, soaked with sweat, lungs burning, but with one job: hand off a message, a bundle of cords, knotted in precise patterns. No ink, no parchment, just memory and string, and it worked. Better than you'd expect. In some ways, better than email. Historians still argue whether quipus were a full writing system or just mnemonic devices, but either way they carried orders, taxes, even censuses across a continent. The fire crackles. You shift, stretch, yawn. Tomorrow you'll descend to a lower village where potatoes, our currency, and myths still live in the stonework. But tonight you drift into sleep, imagining you're one of the potato courier on sacred roads, watched over by mountain spirits and the stars that shaped a civilization. You won't be late, you won't drop the package, and you definitely won't untangle the wrong knot, because in this empire, every string matters. You wake before dawn, cradled in the chill of high-altitude silence. The mountains don't really sleep at night, they just hum more softly. The wind rustles low grasses, and somewhere nearby, a llama makes a grumpy, snorting sound that sounds suspiciously judgmental. You stretch, brush frost off your blanket, and mentally prepare to follow the path of empire again. Ahead lies a valley where something humble built a civilization, not gold, not war horses, not even llamas, but potatoes. You walk down the slope, soft dirt underfoot. These are Andines, painstakingly carved into the mountainside by hands long gone and still used today. The stones are fitted so tightly you couldn't slide a blade between them without cement, mind you. Just pure stone and stone, Tetris. It's here you meet the star of this empire's dietary drama, Solanum tuberosum, the common, wildly underestimated potato. The Inca didn't just grow potatoes, they engineered them, selectively bred them, built their empires, survival around them. You squat at the edge of a furrow and stare at what looks like a tiny, wrinkled lump of dirt. Unimpressive. Until you remember, this little tuber helped feed one of the largest empires in the pre-Columbian Americas, and minor detail kept most of Europe from starving 4 centuries later. No big deal. You pick one up. It's purple, not dyed naturally purple. Some are yellow, some are black-skinned, some resemble misshapen pebbles, others tiny brains. The Incas cultivated over 4,000 types, each matched to specific soil, climate, and altitude. It's like the world's most intense produce Tinder profile. Likes cold nights, loamy soil, partial sun, fears conquistadors. You move through the field with an old farmer who speaks Quichua in a rhythm as old as the hills. He names each potato like a friend. You begin to get the feeling that these aren't just crops, they're characters. The Incas saw them as more than food. They were symbols of life, abundance, ancestry. You offer a coca leaf to the Pachamama mother. Earthened, she seems pleased. Suddenly, the wind changes. It carries the smell of smoke and wet clay. You follow it to a small hut where women are slicing and stomping potatoes as part of the sacred shuko process. This is no lazy kitchen job, it's a full ceremony. The potatoes are frozen by night, sun-dried by day, then danced on, yes, danced on until they're preserved for years, long enough to survive famines, feed armies, or be shipped off to some tax depot via our favorite foot-based UPS system. You help spread some potatoes under the sun and ask, "So, why the stomping?" A woman laughs. "Because no one trusts a lazy potato." Fair enough, the Incas weren't just farming. They were Each terrace was an agricultural experiment. Microclimates, elevation, humidity. It was like a vertical science lab with a side of spiritual reverence. And every discovery, every yield, drought, rot, or bloom was remembered. Not in books, not on clay tablets, but in memory and in knots. Which brings you to the fun part. You walk into a small storehouse and see sacks stacked with potatoes. Standard. But beside them, a bundle of strings carefully hung like wind chimes that forgot how to jingle. It's a quipu, the farmers explain. Red cords might mean food. White population, knots high up equals big numbers. Knots low down equals fewer. And where there's a double knot, that's emphasis, baby dot. The quipu isn't just a message, it's the memory of the harvest. And the state knew exactly how many potatoes you grew, how many you owed in tax, and how many had already been eaten by, let's say, a very enthusiastic guinea pig. You begin to grasp just how advanced this potato-powered bureaucracy really was. Historians still argue whether quipus counted only goods and people, or if they contained full-fledged narrative writing. Some believe they held poems. Others say they stored tax records so dull they'd put even your accountant's emails to shame. But back then, every knot mattered. You walk to a larger village where more terraced fields spread like fans around a ceremonial plaza. Kids kick a stuffed ball near the edge of a field where women are singing while harvesting potatoes. You sit beside a stonemason repairing a wall and ask him, "How many potatoes do you eat in a week?" He shrugs. all of them. Fair. You follow him to a small temple dedicated to Inti, the sun god. Offerings line the steps, golden maize, alpaca wool, and, of course, perfect little potatoes, stacked like blessings. The priests believed Inti gave the people warmth, harvest, and direction. You suspect Inti just really liked hash browns, yet not all potatoes were edible. Some were ceremonial, some medicinal, others were dried, powdered, and used to treat wounds or headaches. The potato was not just a carbit, was a pharmacy, a tax item, a sacred icon, and an ancient trust fund, all rolled into one. Night falls. Again, the wind picks up, and you're offered a bowl of steaming oca tangy Andean tuber that tastes like citrus and carrot. Had a mild disagreement. You sip, you smile, and you notice once again that bundle of strings beside the fire. The quipu never leaves their sight. An elder explains that her grandfather could read them, but she never learned. Her voice trails off. The strings ... talk. But not everyone remembers how to listen. You poke at the knots. One chord is thick and stained. Could it be ... a tax record, a potato delivery, or maybe a joke? Did someone, hundreds of years ago, tie a rude little pun into string and send it across a mountain? You yawn, belly full of root vegetables, head spinning with string. You lie back on a woven mat, watching the smoke curl into the star-thick sky. Somewhere in the dark, you hear the footsteps of a runner pounding the trail, a pouch of sacred spuds on his back, and a bundle of encoded yarn flapping at his side. He'll be in Cusco by dawn. The potatoes will arrive on time, and the least four Naust still runs on nuts, memory, and the humble power of the earth. You've been walking for hours, and by now your legs feel like slightly overcooked quinoa. The air is thinner, drier, and cleaner than anything you've ever breathed, and yet, somehow, your lungs still complain like drama queens. But up ahead, you see it, a wide ribbon of stone path unfolding across the ridge, winding like a lazy serpent toward the clouds. This is no casual hiking trail. You're standing on one of the greatest engineering marvels of the ancient world, the Qhapaq Ñan, or the Great Inca Road. It's not just a road. It's the road, more than 25,000 miles of it, snaking from what is now Colombia down to Chile, wrapping around volcanoes, climbing glaciers, and descending into humid jungle like it's no big deal. Rome's roads, impressive. But Rome had wheels. The Inca had feet, string, and sheer stubbornness. The Qhapaq Ñan wasn't built to be scenic. It was built to function with shocking precision. Its stones are still aligned, still drained, still shockingly good at their jobs. It had retaining walls to prevent landslides, drainage canals to keep it from becoming a mud luge, and carved staircases for when the slope just got too extra. They even had rope bridges for crossing rivers, because stone bridges were apparently too easy. You're not walking on ancient ruins. You're walking on infrastructure. It was designed to unify an empire across impossible terrain fast, and it worked, like really, really well. Pause for a moment to look around. You're standing somewhere between 12,000 and 14,000 feet above sea level. That's higher than most airplane cabins. At this height, your body is quietly filing complaints with your brain. But the Inca runners, they sprinted at speed, carrying messages, potatoes, and sometimes guinea pigs, possibly for dinner, possibly as messengers themselves. Historians are still unsure if that last one is a joke or not. You pass another tamboa, rest stop built at regular intervals along the road. These were the postal hubs of the Inca world. Some were tiny shelters, others had sleeping quarters, food storage, and even stables for llamas, though the llamas mostly carried goods, not people, because llama Uber was not a thing inside the tambo. There's firewood stacked neatly, a large clay jar of chicha fermented corn beer, and of course a bundle of quipus hanging on the wall like a to-do list written by a spider with oct. Local explains that each tambo keeper would know when a runner was coming before he even arrived. Why? Because the last runner just passed through. That's right, the empire had a relay system. Enter the chasqui. They weren't just messengers, they were elite athletes. Imagine if your mailman trained at Olympic altitude and could decode a tax document while running a marathon. The chasqui stood ready at each tambo. When one runner arrived, he'd shout the message or hand over the quipu, and the next would be off before the dust. Even settled, you continue your walk along the ridge and spot a worn stone marker with an odd groove in it that, your guide says, was a distance indicator. The Incas didn't use miles, they measured in topos, roughly equivalent to how far you could walk in a set amount of time, which means every measurement also implied how late you were. No pressure. At a sharp bend in the trail, you find something odd, a carved stone with a flat surface and small channels leading into the earth. This was a ritual site, likely used to bless the road or the journey itself. The Inca believed the landscape was sacred, alive with Apis mountain spirits who watched over travelers. Before long treks, people would pour offerings, coca leaves, chicha, even blood into these carved hollows. Spiritual GPS. Basically, you take a deep breath, touch the stone, and whisper a quick thanks to the nearest APU. Can't hurt, and then comes the view. You round a bend and see it, a sweeping panorama of the sacred valley. Terraces layer the slopes like stripes on a dragon's back. The Urubamba River snakes far below, glittering with sunset, and nestled between peaks. A silver thread of road, still clinging to the cliffs after 500 years. This is what held the empire together. Every city, every village, every potato field connected by stone. It was faster than sending a horse courier in Europe. Information could travel over 150 miles per day, all without a wheel, paper, or pigeon, just legs and loops. You descend a narrow switchback where the steps are steep enough to make your knees issue a formal complaint. But you spot something remarkable, a double-arched gate marking a border between regions. This wasn't just postal infrastructure, it was about control, customs, surveillance, organization. At checkpoints like this, runners would check in, quipus would be logged, and potatoes, well, they'd keep moving. A local legend says that during the height of the empire, not a single sack of potatoes ever went missing. Historians debate this, probably while snacking on French fries. You sit for a break near a flat resting platform called an usanyu, which doubled as a mini ceremonial altar and Inca rest stop patio. Your guide pulls out a pouch of dried oca, some coca leaves, and you guessed it, a tiny ceremonial quipu tied in bright yellow cord. She points to the knots and says, "This one says, we're almost there." You laugh, but you believe her. Because somewhere in this story, in this landscape, in these threads of road and string and history, you realize the Inca weren't just master builders. They were master connectors. They didn't just build paths. They built purpose into every stone and carried it sometimes literally in their backs. And now, as twilight settles and the mountain chill creeps back in, you pull your blanket tighter, place one aching foot in front of the other, and keep walking. The road is still here, and it's waiting. Your legs should hate you by now, but oddly, they don't. Maybe they've just accepted their fate. Or maybe it's the quiet thrill of what's ahead. Today, you're going to meet the real heroes of this entire system. Not generals, not kings, not potato gods. Today, you run with the Chasqui well walk briskly behind them, while wheezing might be more accurate. Because these guys don't play. You arrive at a tambo just as dawn is burning the frost off the thatched roofs. A Chasqui is already warming up, stretching, cracking his knuckles, adjusting his unku, a short tunic, and checking the cords on his putatu, a conch shell horn heel blow when approaching a relay point. No iPhones, just air and lung power. He sees you and nods. You coming, you nod back. You've made terrible decisions before. This is just another one, and then you're off. He runs like gravity forgot him, not reckless fluid. His sandals slapped the stone rhythmically, like drumbeats on the trail. You follow behind, panting, marveling at how his stride eats the trail like it owes him money. Every few miles, there's another runner waiting. No hellos, no hugs. The first Chasqui blows his putatu. The second one hears it, braces, and the handoff is seamless, a verbal message shouted. A quipu tossed, and boom, like a fleshy baton relay. The male is moving again. You pause to breathe, and maybe cry a little. And the tambo keeper offers you a cup of maite de coca. It tastes earthy, green, and vaguely like determination. Your pulse slows. You watch the second runner vanish into the clouds. You ask the tambo keeper, how far do they run? He shrugs, until they stop. That tracks. Chasqui were not casual joggers. They were full-time professionals, fast and highly trained. Many came from conquered tribes, selected for strength, agility, and memory, because they didn't just carry knots. They carried spoken messages to Lam, detailed orders, committed entirely to memory. That the Inca didn't write anything down, remember? Not even grocery lists. If you forgot your orders halfway through the run, congratulations, you may have just started a civil war over quinoa rations to help the Chasqui trained in memorization. Some scholars think they used rhythmic patterns, chants, or stories to encode long messages. Like if your GPS gave directions as a bedtime poem, you ask, how accurate were they? Your guide smiles. Let's just say they weren't allowed to mess up twice. No pressure. And that's the other thing. The empire didn't just expect its runners to be fast. They had to be trustworthy, loyal, and sharp. They might carry marriage proposals, death announcements, war declarations, even emergency messages, like move the llamas, the volcanoes, awake again. Every Chasqui wore a Chasqui Comiaca strap across the chest that held small pouches, one for coca leaves, one for food, and one for the quipu. If intercepted, they'd destroy the cords, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. Some probably carried tiny weapons, though llamas were unlikely to stage a rebellion. Probably, as you hike up another slope, you pass a runner resting by a tree, barefoot, eyes closed. His breathing is calm, meditative. He opens one eye when you pass. I already ran 12 topos today, he mutters. My feet need a divorce. Relatable. Further up the trail, you find a small training camp for new Chasqui. A boy, maybe 13, is tying knots with incredible speed. His teacher watches closely, correcting the angle of a red thread loop. You ask, is he tying a message? The teacher nods. A tax update. Llamas delivered, grain shortfall, and 3 marriages. One of them's going to be messy. You blink. That's all in those knots. She grins. These knots hold more gossip than a village grandmother. You're given a small piece of cord to try. You fumble with the fibers, tying a knot so pitiful it should come with a formal apology. You try again. Still wrong. The teacher pats your shoulder. That's okay. The string listens only to those who respect the story. You smile weakly and promise never to work in logistics. The sun climbs higher. Heat radiates off the stones. You walk behind a runner, carrying a message for the Sapa Inca himself. His back is straight, his pace steady, his quipu bright yellow with twin green cords and a large double knot. You're dying to know what it says. Can I ask what that one means? He chuckles. You just did. He winks and vanishes around a bend. Historians still debate whether the Chasqui had a sort of male security clearance. Were some trained only for certain types of messages? Did the more elite ones memorize military intel, while the rookies ran potato counts and llama birthdays? What is clear, they were essential. Without them, the entire empire stalls. The potatoes stop moving, the taxes pile up, and someone in Cusco never gets their invitation to a moonlit quinoa dance. As dusk falls, you arrive at a rest station, unlike the others. This one is larger, built with finer stone, and features a ceremonial platform where runners place their quipus before entering. This was a central hub, a kind of Andean post office crossed with a temple. Runners enter, kneel, and untie their messages with reverence. Attendants copy the info into new cords, then send fresh runners out again. It's not just logistics, it's ritual. Each knot tied with intention, each cord chosen for color, spin, and placement. You kneel beside one, watching fingers work like looms. The air is filled with soft muttering, thread brushing against thread, and the occasional llama sneeze in the distance. You realize something. These weren't messengers in the background of history. They were the history the runners held. It carried it, delivered it, one breath, one step, one knot at a time. And now, lying under the stars, your head resting on your rolled-up poncho, you can almost hear it, the echo of sandals against stone, a conch shell crying out in the mist, and the soft, delicate whisper of string pulling tight. Somewhere, someone is waiting for news, and thanks to the Chasqui, you know it's on the way. You've hiked the roads, wheezed behind the runners, even stared lovingly at potatoes like they were sacred gems, which, in the Inca Empire, they kind of were. But now it's time to meet the system behind the messengers. The true engine of this information empire wasn't just legs, it was string. You enter a quiet village nestled in a crook between two hills. The roofs are low and slanted, the stone paths smoothed by centuries of footsteps, and every door frame is marked by colorful threads hanging like coated curtains. You've stepped into the world of the quiputha talking knots of the Andes. Hanging in a shaded corner of a storage building is one of them. Dozens of cords droop from a thicker primary strand, like the tentacles of a well-organized jellyfish. Each strand varies in color, some tan, others indigo or deep red, and on each cord, knots, big, small, clustered, spaced out, sometimes tied in pairs or triplets. This is a message, and no, you can't read it, but someone can. Your guide beckons you to a squat, stone house where an old man sits cross-legged on the floor, fingers gently working through a bundle of cord like it's sacred scripture. He hums softly as he moves. You sit across from him. What does it say? You whisper. He doesn't answer for a while. Then he points. This cord tells how many people live in the village. That one tracks the corn harvest. This knot means there was a wedding last moon. You stare at the colored threads, blinking. There are no symbols, no letters, just string. And yet entire events, lives, taxes, trades, all captured and cataloged like a 15th century Excel sheet made of alpaca fiber. Welcome to the Inca data cloud, made of wool, synced by foot. Historians still argue whether quipus represent a full written language or are simply mnemonic aids for oral memory. Some scholars believe that certain arrangement patterns, spacing, spin direction, chord, coloring code, syllables, or words. Others believe the quipu was more like a ledger, a memory device that only trained specialists, the Qhapaq, could interpret. You ask the old man, do you know what every knot means? He smiles, sadly. I know what my father taught me, but there are knots no one remembers anymore. He holds up a faded green strand. This one. We think it means river tax, or maybe llama plague. No one knows now. It hits you. An entire language might have slipped through our fingers, tied neatly in wool, then lost to time. The Spanish chroniclers, bless their colonizing hearts, described quipus with wide-eyed confusion. Some called them barbaric, others feared they were demonic spells. Many were burned, others hidden, and some still hang in private homes today, protected like fragile heirlooms. But back then, these weren't mystical curios. They were government records, stored in warehouses, tracked by trained officials, audited like with real audits. Imagine a tax season where your refund is encoded in knots and carried by a barefoot teen named Diego sprinting over a volcano. You stand now in front of a larger ceremonial building, once a regional record center. It's filled with hooks along the walls, each holding a different quipu. Beside each, a carved symbol, possibly indicating the type of message. A tax, a census, maybe a prophecy. You touch one carefully. It's soft but strong. The wool has held together better than you'd expect after 5 centuries. The knots are small and tight, like tiny clenched fists frozen mid-sentence. The Qhapaq, those who read and created these cords, were more than bureaucrats. They were historians, accountants, poets, maybe even priests. They didn't just copy numbers, they remembered entire stories. Some had apprentices, others were chosen by the state. Their role, record everything, remember everything. You sit with a young woman who's part of a new research team trying to decode surviving quipus. She holds one in gloved hands. We think, this one might be a birth registry, she says. The knot spacing suggests ages. See how this strand has a tighter cluster of knots near the top. She turns the quipu slightly. Or, it's a list of llama milk quotas. Honestly, we don't know yet. You both laugh, but gently. These strings deserve reverence. The Inca didn't just use quipus for record keeping. They were portable memory systems. A runner couldn't carry clay tablets or carved stone, but he could carry 20 feet of knotted thread. The system could be read on the move, replicated if lost, or burned if captured. And the structure of a quipu. It's brilliant. Each chord hung from a main string like a page in a book. Placement mattered. Color mattered. Twist directionis or Z spin mattered. Knot types mattered. Position from the top down mattered. There were even parent chords and child chords, nested information, hierarchies, metadata. It's not writing the way we think of it. It's writing reimagined. You walk to a cliffside where a small shrine overlooks a valley flooded with golden afternoon light. You watch a woman tying a modern quipu. She's learned the tradition from her grandmother. Each knot she makes today tells a story not for the state, not for the tax office, but for her family. Births, deaths, days the crops thrived, days they didn't. It's intimate, almost too sacred to watch. She finishes and places the cord bundle into a woven pouch, tucking it near a carved stone, so Pachamama can hear it, she says. You don't ask questions. Some things you just nod at respectfully. Down in the valley, someone shouts, "A runner is coming." You hear the faint toot of a conch shell. The woman smiles. Maybe more news, maybe more knots. You watch the runner approach, pouch bouncing at his side. He might be carrying tax updates, or a report on potato rot, or a love letter encoded in green string. Whatever it is, it will arrive. It will be remembered. And somewhere, someone will tie it into history. The mountains are quieter today. Less wind, more warmth. It's the kind of stillness that feels earned, like the earth is giving you a moment to breathe. You're walking through a high-altitude basin rimmed by terraces and low stone walls. And up ahead, there's something oddly charming about the next building you approach. It's round, thick-walled stone, half submerged into the slope like a patient turtle. And what's inside? Beans and maize and quinoa. And of course, potatoes, hundreds of them, dried, raw, powdered, sliced. If there's a way to prepare a tuber, it's represented here. You've just entered one of the empire's Inca state storehouses, and you're about to witness how this empire managed its food like an accountant with obsessive tendencies. You step inside and immediately feel the drop in temperature. The walls are thick, the window slits narrow, and the airflow is designed to wick away moisture. There's no mold, no rodents, just shelf after shelf of sacks, baskets, and neatly tied bundles. A local guide explains, these silos kept food fresh for years. You blink, without salt or smoke. She nods, just air, height, and dry bones. You look up, thin wooden beams, still intact after centuries, support the roof. Ingenious slats in the walls allow ventilation, channeling the crisp Andean air like nature's own AC system. The Incas didn't just store food, they preserved it scientifically. There were thousands of calcas across the empire, arranged in clusters near roads, political centers, and military outposts. Some were reserved for the army, others for festivals. Many were designated for redistribution, Because this empire didn't just collect food, it shared it in times of drought or frost. Officials would open the storehouses, distribute rations based on regional need, yes, tracked by quipus, and make sure no one starved, at least, not if the system held. You touch a sack of dried oca. It crinkles, still slightly spongy, after who knows how many centuries. You resist the urge to taste it. Barely nearby, another kalka holds more than food. Woven tunics, sinew cords, clay bowls, everything stored with obsessive care, like the gods themselves might come down and demand a surprise audit. And this is no exaggeration, because for the Incas, storage was sacred. These were not just pantries, they were symbols of power. You sit beside an old man shelling beans in the sun. His fingers are quick, methodical. You ask, why build so many storehouses? He laughs, never looking up. To remind us we're never alone. That hits deep. Inca society wasn't capitalist. It wasn't even quite socialist. It was everyone owed labor called mitahan. In return, the state provided food, protection, and clothing. If you farmed potatoes for your region, part of your crop went into storage. And when your neighbor's field flooded, the potatoes came back around. Even the road system supported this. Runners didn't just carry messages, they coordinated distributions. The chasqui might arrive in a village with a quipu that said, in effect, send 400 sacks of chuco to the southern outpost. Now, and it would happen, not out of fear, but out of duty, because the system worked. You climb a small rise and enter another storage cluster. This one perched high on a windy ridge. From here, you can see a wide network of trails, all leading toward different valleys, strategic placement, perfect airflow. This wasn't random. Each kalka was mapped into the greater scheme of empire-like nodes in a well-fed, well-dressed neural network. Historians still marvel at how sophisticated it all was. They debate how much was centrally controlled versus locally managed. Did the high officials dictate every bean movement? Or did village leaders use quipus to make calls on the ground? Either way, the scale is staggering. At its peak, the Inca Empire may have maintained hundreds of thousands of tons of stored food and supplies, and it all ran without money. No currency, just labor, loyalty, and string. You squat beside a pile of freeze-dried potatoes and realize this system outlasted floods, droughts, and political squabbles. It faltered only when something truly alien arrived, but that's later. For now, your guide hands you a rough piece of cloth filled with dried maize. She grins. Souvenir. You grin back. Do I have to declare this at customs? She shrugs. Only if the chasqui catch you. Down below, you see a small plaza where villagers are gathering. It's distribution day. From the nearest kalka, attendants are handing out food. Each family's share depends on the numbers in a nearby quipu. You peer over a shoulder and spot a thick red cord with evenly spaced knots. Someone murmurs, 3 children, 1 elder, no llama. The math is quiet, efficient, personal. No scanning barcodes, no credit cards, just memory and wool. You join the circle, accepting a small woven bag of dried tubers. They smell ancient but good, like trust. You sit in the grass and nibble on one. It tastes like cold earth and crisp sunlight. Girl next to you points to the sky. That cloud looks like a potato. You nod solemnly. they all do now. Night falls over the storehouses. You linger near the round walls, warm air rising gently from the valley below. The Qhapaqs glow softly in torchlight, guardians of past harvests and future hope. And as you lay back, resting your head on a folded poncho, you realize something. This wasn't just an empire. It was a refrigerator. A massive, meticulously organized, state-run refrigerator. And it never forgot a single potato. You wake up warm, oddly comforted by the idea that you're sleeping next to 5 tons of dried potatoes. The sun hasn't quite broken the ridge yet, but the air has already lost its edge, and the Qhapaqs behind you look like hibernating guardians of the earth's bounty today. You're heading toward the real nerve center of the Inca Empire, Cusco. Not the tourist-filled city with llamas in sunglasses and pizza shops on every corner, no. The original Cusco, the navel of the world. The beating heart from which runners, rulers, and roasted corn radiated in all directions. The place where decisions were made, strings were tied, and potatoes found their purpose. The journey takes time, everything in the Andes does. You follow the Qhapaq Ñan as it cuts across ridges and dips into cloud-shadowed valleys. Llamas glance at you like judgmental librarians. A young chasqui breezes past you like gravity doesn't apply to him. Finally, after days of blisters, altitude headaches, and one deeply questionable guinea pig stew, you arrive. At first, it doesn't look like much. The outer districts are low-built, utilitarian quiet, but then the road widens, the stones become tighter, smoother, more confident, and suddenly you're in the middle of it. Cusco.u, stop and spin slowly in place. There's a geometry to it. 4 roads stretch from the central plaza, one toward each quarter of the empire. Chinchaysuyu, Antisuyu, Kalasuyu, and Kantasuyu. You're standing in the center of a giant human map. The city itself is shaped like a puma, no joke. The head is the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, where zigzagging stone walls mimic teeth. The heart, the central temple district, and the tail snakes into the southern valley. You've literally entered the belly of the beast, and it's organized like an obsessive god. Took up urban planning. Water flows through engineered canals. Stone streets follow the natural slope of the land. Drainage systems prevent flooding. And towering above it all is the temple of the sun Qhapaq, covered in plates of gold so bright the Spaniards claimed it hurt their eyes. You walk past where those golden walls once shone. Now a monastery stands there, but under the surface beneath plaster and centuries you can still see it. The old foundation. Massive stones carved so precisely they make Lego look amateur. No mortar, no mistakes. Qhapaq wasn't just a temple. It was the central archive. Here, priests, scholars, and Qhapaq gathered to track everything. Census numbers, potato yields, ritual calendars, even astronomical observations. Some believe Qhapaq housed the largest collection of quipus in the empire, a woolen library, a memory palace. You enter a smaller chamber where a model reconstruction shows how the cords were once displayed. Rows and rows of hanging knots, categorized by topic. Census records over here, taxation cords there. A few ceremonial strings near the sun altar, a guide explains. We think different knots were used for sacred things, ceremonies, eclipses, offerings. They tied stories as well as numbers. You ask like actual stories. She nods, one string for the storyteller, one for the listener. They'd untie as they told the tale. Historians still argue whether this is myth or truth. Some believe that full narrative storytelling was embedded in certain high-level quipus. Others argue that's wishful thinking, just elaborate ledgers. Nothing more, but you hold a replica cord and feel it, the thickness, the grain, the human touch. Maybe a knot was just a number, or maybe it was a name, a joke, a heartbreak. You walk back into the sunlight, past an old man spinning wool into cord near the plaza. He hums as he works, fingers moving in tight, practiced loops. You ask him what he's making. He shrugs. A memory. Seems reasonable beyond the temple complex. You climb the steep hill toward Sacsayhuaman, the fortress that formed the head of Cusco's puma shape. From here, the view is breathtaking. The entire valley unfurls before you like a tapestry. Roads slice the land into neat quarters. Calcas dot the hillsides, and people move like ants in perfect rhythm. You look at the walls around you. Some of these stones weigh more than a tank, the largest over 120 tons, and yet they were hauled here without wheels, pulleys, or draft animals. They were rolled, dragged, and fit together so precisely that 5 centuries later they haven't budged. You run your hand along one cool, rough, immovable. This is how Cusco endured, by anchoring everything in stone and string, and potatoes. Obviously, in a nearby building, you visit a replica of the Inca record office. A modern artist has recreated what it might have looked like. Shelves lined with clay pots, each labeled with a quipu sticking out like a woolen bookmark, tax cords, ration reports, and yes, potato distribution logs. You try reading one. It makes your brain feel like a boiled egg. A small plaque reads, "To understand the Inca state, you must understand the logic of reciprocity. Give to the empire, receive in return." Everyone has a thread in the quipu. You stare at that line. Everyone has a thread. The sun begins to set, casting gold across the red-roofed city. From up here, Cusco glows like a hearth, Fira city, designed not just to govern, but to remember. And in that light, you start to understand the Inca didn't write with ink. They wrote with roads, with runners, with roots, with knots. And tonight, as you curl up on a rooftop blanket, watching the stars blink on above the sacred valley, you feel your place in the thread, however small. Tug just a little tighter. You're part of the story now. The city of Cusco fades behind you like a page turned, but the thread, it continues. You're walking southeast now, tracing the old Qhapaq Ñan as it threads its way into the lower highlands. There's more oxygen down here your lungs throw. A small party, but there's also more humidity and mosquitoes and jungle sounds that seem engineered to make you question your choices. But you press on, because the next chapter of this story takes you to the edges of the empire, to where the runners were brave, the roads were muddy, and the potatoes, they were still moving, but the language got a little improvisational. Welcome to the Inca fringes, the empire at its peak. Spanned over 2,500 miles north to south, longer than the continental U.S., and while the core near Cusco was organized, paved, and polished, the peripheries were more like the wild, woolly version of corporate outreach. Still impressive, still connected, just a little weirder. You arrive in a small jungle settlement near the eastern frontier. It's damp, fragrant, and the architecture is less stone engineering marvel and more woven magic hut. But don't let that fool you. This place was part of the network. A tambo here still functions. Runners still pass through, and quipus still hang on the beams, slightly moldy but proud. A local points to a vibrant blue cord. This one warns of river flooding. The twist direction is backwards, signals danger. You blink, backwards. He nods. The cords talk in circles out here. You learn quickly, on the edges, local customs blended with Inca systems. Some quipus were read differently. Some runners sang messages instead of shouting them. Some communities even added shell beads or feathers to their cords, meaning the information passed wasn't just numerical, but symbolic, spiritual, maybe. Even sarcastic. Historians still argue whether these regional tweaks were approved by Cusco or tolerated out of necessity. Some say the empire was micromanaged. Others believe it was looser, more like a network of trusted franchises than a hard dictatorship. You crouch by a runner, preparing his satchel. He ties a quipu with visible frustration. What's wrong? You ask. He grunts. This cord says, deliver maize to the anti-Suyu commander. But we ran out of maize, so I'm sending squash. He adds a small, knotted flag to the end of the stringa modifier, the quipu equivalent of, sorry, ran out of fries. Gave you onion rings. You smile. The system bends, but it doesn't break. Further along the trail, you meet a group of villagers gathered under a wooden canopy, reviewing a recent delivery. Each item is checked against a cord. 3 baskets of dried fish, not. 2 jugs of chicha, not. No tobacco, double, not. They argue over the double knot. Did the runner forget it? Was it never sent? Was it stolen? Eventually, they resolve it with the most Incan of solutions. They tie a correction cord and send it back with the next runner. Congratulations. You've just witnessed the world's first customer service complaint handled entirely with string. But it's not just logistics here. The periphery is also home to ritual. Quipus cords, not used for record keeping, but for prayer, divination, and memory. A shaman invites you to observe a ritual. She lays out a woven cloth, places coca leaves, feathers, and 3 quipus in a triangle. As the wind picks up, she chants soft, rhythmic syllables, her fingers moving slowly through the cords. These are dream stories, she whispers. Visions we tie before we forget. You shiver, not from cold, from something else. Later, you sit beside a young boy tying his first quipu. His teacher corrects him gently. No, spin this one right. That's for friendship. Left is for mistakes. You raise an eyebrow. There's a friendship knot. The teacher grins. Of course, who would remember you without one? You make a mental note to tie your own, just in case. Down in the valley, the road forks. One trail climbs into a cloud-covered pass. Another dips into a dense grove of trees. A señas, an actual stone synogates which region lies ahead. You realize something else about this empire. They mapped it with their feet. No maps, no GPS, just runners, knots, and shared memory. A group of elder runners sits around a fire that night, swapping tales. One tells the story of a delivery gone. Wrong quipu, wrong tambo, right potato. Somehow the potato arrived in perfect condition. The message, not so much. Another recalls a time when a message from the coast arrived, smelling like fish and wet feathers. The cord absorbed the ocean. He chuckles. They laugh, remembering. Their eyes shine when they talk about the road, the speed, the pressure, the joy of being the pulse between villages. You ask if they ever got tired. They nod, but the thread doesn't wait. One says, if you rest too long, it moves without you. That sticks with you. Back in your hammock, swaying gently beneath a roof of woven reeds, you stare at the ceiling and wonder how many other civilizations trusted memory over ink, trusted people over parchment, trusted knots to carry the soul of an empire. The Inca did. Even in the mist, the mud, the margins, they kept tying. And somehow, even out here, the potatoes still made it through. Rain begins before dawn, soft at first, then confident. The kind of rain that soaks not just your clothes, but your ambition. You roll up your hammock like a soggy burrito and head out, following a slushy ribbon of the Qhapaq Ñan as it slips into the misty foothills. Today, you're going to the coast. Yes, the coast. That strip of desert wedged between mountains and ocean, where the sand could fry an egg and the humidity could steam a potato without a pot. It's a strange place for an empire based in the Andes, but the Inca didn't care for obstacles. They wanted fish, they wanted salt, they wanted access, and so, naturally, they tied a string to it. You descend slowly, step by cautious step, watching the landscape change. Green fades to gold, forests to scrub, then to flat, dry plains with lonely cacti and skittish lizards. A different rhythm pulses here, slower, but still connected in the distance. You see them, long, low storehouses, like sandy whales stranded on a dune. Kulkazis, even here, because the coast produced things the mountains couldn't. Seafood, dried anchovies, salt cakes, and exotic shells that were considered ceremonial currency inland. And what did they send in return? You guessed it, potatoes, dried and bundled, tied tight in woolen sacks, carried across elevation like edible emails. The runners still ran, the quipus still tracked every sack, and the empire still pulsed with its braided lifelines. You arrive at a fishing village, the wind briny and sharp. A family is preparing a shipment dried sardines stacked into baskets lined with cactus fibers. Beside them, a young girl finishes a bright orange quipu. She smiles when you ask what it says. 60 fish, 1 marriage, and we lost the bucket. Priorities, apparently. But here's the twist. Coastal quipus. They're weird, different materials, different logic. Some cords are made of twisted plant fiber instead of wool. Some contain shell fragments, tiny beads, even bits of dried seaweed. The coast rewrote the book, except the book was string, and no one was sure what chapter they were on. Historians still argue, were these coastal chords a separate dialect, a lost offshoot of the main system, or just experimental office stationery? You hold one that smells faintly of the ocean and has an oddly consistent knot spacing. A researcher nearby tells you it might be a tide chart tracking lunar cycles and their impact on fishing. Or it could be a list of debts. Or someone's wedding guest list with passive-aggressive spacing to indicate X's. There's no Rosetta Stone, just possibilities. Later, you join a small caravan preparing to head back uphill. Llamas are loaded with bundles, some of maize, some of shells, a few with chicha in tightly sealed gourds. A tambo official checks each with a master quipu, a thick central cord with dozens of pale yellow offshoots. You ask how he knows what it says. He shrugs. Same way I know my wife's tone when she says, "Fine," you just feel it. Fair enough. Before leaving, you visit a coastal administrative center, now half buried in sand. It's made of adobe and shaped like a fishhook. Inside, there's a platform where runners once passed messages, and a sunken room where officials reviewed incoming cords. One corner is filled with broken pottery. You pick up a shard with a faint red smearitsnot paint. It's cochineal, a precious red dye made from crushed insects, worth its weight in gold inland. You wonder what quipu tracked this shipment. You wonder who tied the knots. Then you walk to the edge of the bluff below. The ocean crashes a relentless, foamy roar that reminds you how fragile all this was. The cords, the runners, the dried fish, landscapes, mountain and sea, and yet somehow they made it work because the thread connected everything and the potatoes still moving. At night, you camped near the shore. A fisherman gives you a gift, a tiny seaweed-colored quipu tied to a scrap of driftwood. For luck, he says, or at least for not getting lost. You hang it near your fire. It twists gently in the breeze, like it remembers the last 100 hands that passed it down. The stars overhead are unfamiliar, quite matches memory, but something about the cord flickering in the firelight makes you feel steady. Tomorrow you'll climb again, but tonight, on this edge between world salt and stone, memory and water, you rest, because the empire never stopped at Cusco. It reached the waves and whispered to the sea. Your thighs are protesting, your lungs sound like a winded llama, and your last clean tunic smells like defeat. But you're climbing again, leaving the coastal plains and making your slow return inland. The thread is tugging you upward, because while Cusco may have been the center of the Inca world, true power rested in someone else's sandals. It's time to meet the Sapa, Inca, the divine ruler, living sun, potato overlord, and the one person every quipu ultimately served. You arrive in a smaller hill town first, the air thin but bustling. People are gathered for a festival, bright tunics, flutes, drums, and the rhythmic stomp of dancers who move in tight circles, mimicking the passage of time. Between dances, officials review quipus, one for the food, one for the dancers, one for the guest list. A boy offers you a drink of chicha, and you nod politely, even though it smells like someone's grandma tried to make kombucha with corn and anxiety. You sip, it's weirdly good, and then the mood shifts. A hush moves through the plaza like a breeze made of respect. People part. Flags rise. The Sapa Inca is passing through. You don't see him directly, just a shimmer of gold and feathers as he moves past on a litter carried by servants. His face is obscured by a fan of macaw feathers. His garments glitter in the sun, and behind him, Qhapaq, runners, guards, priests. This isn't just a royal convoy, it's a walking bureaucracy. You whisper to a local, "Does he know how to read the knots?" The man laughs. He doesn't need to. He has the people who do. And that's when it clicks. The quipu system wasn't just about recording things. It was about control. The Inca state could manage an empire the size of Western Europe without wheels, steel, or writing, because every potato, every person, every llama-related incident was tracked in cords that flowed upward to him, your guide, a young historian, with wind-chapped lips and a long feather in her braid, leads you to a ceremonial site on a nearby hill. This is where the Inca received reports, she explains. Each region sent representatives with offerings and quipus. The messages were read aloud. Debates happened here. Justice was given. You step across the stones, imagining it. Rows of Qhapaq standing in reverence, reading chords aloud while the Sapa Inca listened. Face unreadable behind gold. Some chords carried good news, record harvests, marriages, tribute paid on time. Others were less cheerful rebellion rumors, crop failures, one too many pumas stealing chickens. The Sapa Inca ruled not just with force, but with information, and the chords were his lifeline. You visit a preserved tambo in the highlands, known as a chakra check. A preserved tambo in the highlands, known as a chakra checkpoint. A scribe here once collected data from farmers, traders, and runners. You find carvings on the wall, nothing fancy, just markings for dates and moons. A quipu hangs from a ceiling beam, faded but legible. You run your fingers along the knots. One thick cord knotted in triples, another frayed, altered after a dispute. You realize you're holding a decision in your hands, perhaps centuries old. A command passed from peasant to priest to emperor, encoded in nothing but string and memory. Historians still argue about how much direct control the Sapa Inca had. Was he a micromanager, thumbing through chords like a paranoid accountant, or more of a symbolic hub, letting regional administrators do the actual math? Either way, the thread always pointed to him. And he wasn't just a king, he was a god. The Inca claimed descent from Inti, the sun god, and believed their ruler was the living embodiment of divine order. His words were law. His body, when he died, was not buried, was mummified, dressed, fed, and consulted on state matters for generations. You enter a sacred site, dark, cool, silent. An old ceremonial chamber where officials once stored offerings. You spot a faint circle burned into the floor. This was where the chords were blessed. Your guide says, "Blessed." You echo. She nods. Before certain messages left for Cuscawar came from it, they were passed through smoke, kissed by priests, and offered a prayer. You stare at a replica quipu hanging in the dim light. It's dyed black, with crimson cords branching from it, clearly ceremonial, and you think, this isn't just logistics. It's faith in string. Outside, the wind picks up. You pass a group of children learning to tie simple quipus. Their teacher claps slowly, repeating a rhyme to help them remember chord placement. One girl proudly shows you her work. 4 yellow knots, spaced evenly. What does it mean? You ask. She grins. My dog stole a potato. An eternal truth back on the trail. You find yourself thinking of all the chords that ever passed through this system. All the quipus now gone. Burned, buried, lost in landslides, or eaten by llamas with poor boundaries. And yet, the system worked. It built roads, fed armies, bound empires, and it all pointed back to one man in gold, watching the chords unravel. At his feet, like rays from the sun, at night, you reach a mountain overlook. Below, the valleys glow with cooking fires. You imagine the Sapa Incas, Qhapaq, still tying chords by lamplight, still tracking grain and marriages and runaway llamas, and above you, the stars, a sky full of knots, each one telling a story. The thread now pulls you higher than ever. You've entered the sacred zone, not just of geography, but of belief. Up here, where oxygen is a theory and the clouds flirt with the cliffs, the Inca built something remarkable. Not just cities, not just roads, but meaning stitched into stone, tied into sky. You're going to Machu Picchu. Yes, that one. The postcard, the tourist magnet, the high-altitude Instagram darling. But you're not taking the train. You're walking the old way through narrow switchbacks and stone, paths known only to moss and memory. It begins with silence, not absence of sound, but presence of stillness, the kind of hush that feels like an altar. Then, from the mist, it emerges, terraces first, long, green, ribbed steps carved into the mountainside like a giant's fingerprint. Then buildings, some rectangular, some trapezoidal, all stubbornly elegant. The stones fit together so precisely that not even a credit card could slide between them. And there's no mortar, no filler, just precision, patience, and perfect geometry. You wander slowly, reverently. This is no mere retreat. It was a royal estate, a ritual hub, a cosmic observatory, and perhaps even a final resting place. And woven through it all, quipus. Historians still argue about how many were used here or whether they were burned during the Spanish Purge. No known quipus have been recovered from the site itself, but scattered records suggest this place was once home to elite Qhapaq, recording celestial events, seasonal cycles, and state rituals too sensitive for ordinary chords. You duck into a narrow room, windowless, quiet, smelling faintly of the AMP stone and llama. A small niche in the wall likely once held ceremonial objects. You can almost picture it, a sacred quipu hanging here, fluttering gently in the incense smoke. Beside you, a young researcher mutters, "We think the priest tied new knots during solstices to mark the sun's return." You ask, "A report or a prayer?" She grins. Yes. Outside, you approach the Intihuatana stone, the famous hitching post of the sun, a carved granite pillar said to anchor Intihu, the sun god, to the earth. On solstices, shadows align precisely. Priests would track these celestial movements with ritual and record, and possibly with knots. A fringe theory, don't laugh, suggests that astronomical quipus existed, cords used to track star positions, eclipse cycles, and lunar phases. There's no smoking alpaca to prove it yet, but some quipus show strange patterns in spacing and twist direction, almost rhythmic, like time, braided. And where better to tie the cosmos into wool than here? You sit on a sun-warmed terrace and nibble dried oca as the mist peels away from the valley below. The mountains roll out like green waves frozen in place. You feel small, in a good way, because Machu Picchu wasn't just about power, it was about place. The Incas believed certain landscapes were alive, sacred. The Quechua word is Wicca, kind of spiritual beacon. And here, everything is waka, even potatoes. Yes, even them. A local farmer tells you the legend of the ancestor tubera, potato so perfectly round and satisfying that it was mistaken for a god. It vanished, they say, into the clouds and only returns to bless the faithful during lean seasons. He points to a small plot on a terraced ledge. That's where I plant my prayers. You nod slowly, unsure whether to laugh or cry. So you just say, same. You visit the temple of the three windows, sunlight pouring through openings in perfect alignment. The view is stunning, the engineering more so. It all lines up, not just structurally, but spiritually. This was architecture as intention. You ask a passing guide, was this a city or a shrine? He shrugs. Yes. It's a recurring theme. That night, you camp just beyond the city walls. Modern rules, no sleeping in the ruins themselves. But you're close enough to hear the whisper. Of the stones, you dream of cords stretched across constellations. Runners tracing stars. Quipus tied to moonlight. And potatoes. Always potatoes at dawn. The mountains go golden. You sip hot cocoa tea and watch a small hawk circle overhead. Below, the stone walls hold their shape eternal, unbothered by centuries. And you wonder, what did the last quipu here say? Did it record? A feast, a death, an eclipse. Did it whisper goodbye when the cords were untied? No one knows, but you suspect it said this. We were here, we tied the world together, and we remembered everything. You descend from Machu Picchu with the sun at your back, your breath slow, your mind humming like a taut chord. Watched history swirl in dust and mist. But the thread isn't finished with you yet, because just as the Incas tied together an empire with roads and runners and knots, pale men with armor that glints like mirrors, and animals with hooves and snorting nostrils. Invisible threads of death, smallpox, measles, plagues that run faster than the chasqui ever could. You're walking through a valley now, drier than before, off balance. The Sapa Inca, Qhapaq, has died of illness. A civil war has broken out between his sons, Atahualpa and Huascar. The roads still run, the cords are still tied, but the thread fraying. You arrive in a small town where a local museum has recreated the moment everything changed. Behind glass, a replica of Atahualpa's royal litter, gold-plated, obscene in its brilliance, and beside it, a Spanish sword, dull, heavy, bloody. The Spanish capture Atahualpa in 1532. He offers a room filled with gold as ransom. They take it tanned, then kill him anyway. In that moment, the empire doesn't fall, it shatters. You walk through a corridor of dim dioramas. One shows priests burning quipus. Spanish officials called them works of the devil-tangled signs of pagan idolatry. Others suspected they were secret messages of rebellion. Some just didn't care. They torched them all the same. Historians still argue how many were destroyed. Some say thousands, others say millions. Nearly all of them gone. You sit on a bench beside a display of surviving quipus. The cords are dry, the colors faded. They look tired, and you feel it grief, not just for the people lost. They didn't just erase data, they erased voices. There were real people who remembered which knot meant what. Who could glance at a cord and tell you which elder had 3 llamas and a cousin in Antisuyu? Who could read jokes and wishes and wheat shipments with the same reverence? And they were silenced. You meet a descendant of a Qhapaq comic. His family name still carries weight in the region. He invites you to his home, where he shows you a replica quipu he made as a child. This is my grandfather, he says, touching a knot gently. He taught me the prayer chords. But the government won't recognize them. They say it's just string. You nod slowly. But it remembers him. He smiles. It remembers everything. Deep in the forest, the final Inca rulers regrouped and held out for decades, refusing to surrender. They tied new quipus, created guerrilla routes, sent runners in secret. You walk through the ruins in near silence. the trees reclaiming every stone just hidden. Because even after conquest, people kept tying. They used quipus for church tithes, for census records, for market tallies. In the shadows, quiet, defiant, you meet an old woman in a remote village. She grins, nods, and lies in a university lab back in the city. Some believe there's still a readable language hidden in the structure spacing. A few match known villages, a few don't. You ask the lead researcher what it means. She shrugs, eyes gleaming. We might have found places that aren't on any map. Places only the strings remember. You leave with that thought unraveling in your mind. The Spanish won the war. The palaces fell, the cords burned, but the memory, it frayed, it never snapped, and in quiet places, across centuries, the knots kept whispering, "We are still here." You wake with the sound of fingers twisting string. No. Really, you're in a Quechua, weaving village, tucked high into a valley, so steep, it feels like the sky had to bend to fit the mountain in. Women sit in a semicircle near a communal fire, their hands dancing in rhythm. But they're not making blankets today. They're tying quipus. Modern ones. You walk closer. At first, you assume they're just practicing, maybe part of a cultural heritage class. But no, these women are fluent. They're reviving. One of them, Rosie, invites you to sit. Her fingers never stop moving. We tie what we need, she explains. Harvest records, births, names, some for ceremony, some just for the feel of it. You ask, "Do you still remember what the knots mean?" Rosa smiles. "My hands do, and there it is. The renaissance of a lost language, not from dusty libraries or sterile labs, but from grandmothers, farmers, kids learning in kitchens. The knowledge that once held an empire is now quietly rerouting in the everyday you're here because you followed the thread almost full circle. From the heights of Machu Picchu, through broken courts and burning temples, into the ashes of history, and now into soft, calloused palms tying new futures. The movement is small, gentle, unofficial, but real. Some communities across Peru and Bolivia are bringing quipus into schools, not as artifacts, but as tools. Children learn basic counting with strings. Others record dreams. One teacher uses them as personal journals, each not a mood, a moment, a thought. You visit a classroom where students show off their chords. "This one is my week," a boy says. "Monday was bad. Tuesday was a little better. Wednesday I had soup." You examine it. The Monday knot is thick, messy. Wednesday's is neat, with a tiny white bead tucked into the twist. Historians still argue whether reviving quipus is anthropology, performance, or protest. Some claim it's symbolic. At best, no one truly reads the old chords anymore. But you've seen it. The women with remembering fingers, the children whose moods not into yarn, the prayers still whispered into string. You attend a small ceremony held under an ancient waka tree-twisted trunk, thick roots, branches like arms. Offerings are placed at the base, coca leaves, potatoes, red ribbons. End quipus, bright new ones. Braided with confidence, an elder steps forward and raises a cord over her head. She speaks softly, voice like worn cloth. "This thread is the voice of my mother and her mother and her mother before her. We tie to remember, we tie to speak, We tie because we are not gone. You swallow something heavy. No one claps. No one needs to. You stay that night in a home strung with wool cords. One above the dormant to keep out bad spirits. One near the hearth-tracking stored maize. One by the bed recording births and deaths. Tied long ago by a great-grandfather no one remembers, but everyone honors. And as you lay under a blanket, thick with dust and love, you understand what the Inca really built. Not roads, not palaces, not armies. They built a world held together by memory. The thread didn't die when the empire fell. It just went quiet. Now it rustles again in fingers on tongues. In stories that refuse to vanish. In the morning, before you leave, Rosa presses a small bundle into your hand. A Qhapaq Modern, made of alpaca wool. 3 cords. 1 blue, 1 yellow, 1 earth red. What does it say? You ask. She shrugs. You'll remember when you need to. And you believe her. You carry it tucked in your pack now, nestled beside a sun-dried potato. Because maybe that's all we are in the Inda. Few good knots. A thread to hold, and the hope that someone will remember how to read us. You're leaving the valley now, the thread still wound tight in your satchel. Tugs gently with each step, reminding you there's still a little more to uncover, one last stretch of road to walk. Not in the Andes this time, but somewhere even trickier to navigate. The modern world. You arrive in a city, probably Lima, though it could be Cusco or La Paz, or even New York, wherever it is. It smells like diesel and roasted corn, and there's a honk every 7 seconds just to remind you that serenity is rented, not owned, here in the glow of neon and the rattle of ride shares. You wouldn't expect to find anything Inca left, but it's here, woven in ways no empire could fully erase. In a dusty back room of a national museum, you meet a woman named Camila. She's an archivist, small, sharp, and deeply suspicious of tourists. But when you show her the quipu Rosa gave you, something changes in her eyes. She ushers you past velvet ropes, blinking fluorescence, and cracked filing cabinets in the back, under controlled humidity and armed with cotton gloves. She shows you the real thing, an Inca raw quipu preserved by miracle and climate, resting on black velvet dot. It's simple, just a few chords, faded blue and ochre. But the moment your eyes land on it, something stirs. The same feeling you got in that mountainside temple. The same quiet breath you heard at vilcabamba.camila leans in and whispers, "We don't know what it says, but we know it was important." You ask her what she thinks it's trying to tell us. She smiles. That we're late to listen, she says. And she's right. Because the truth is, while we race to build faster computers, taller towers, and louder voices, the Inca once ruled an empire with silence, memory, and knots. With no writing, no money, no wheels, just a belief that if you care for the thread, the world stays together. Outside, the city roars. You wander the streets, half lost, half mesmerized. Graffiti on a crumbling wall catches your eye. Someone has drawn a giant knot, tangled but elegant. Below it, we still remember. In a corner cafe, you overhear a college student explaining quipus to her friends. It's like data compression, but with wool. They laugh. They're not wrong. You ride a bus through a neighborhood named after Pachacati, the great Sapa Inca. Every street sign a quiet callback. Someone on the corner sells freeze-dried potatoes. Another sells hand-tied bracelets in sacred geometry. And it hits you. The thread didn't break. It adapted. It moved from royal courts to schoolrooms, from mountaintops to kitchen tables, from empire to whisper, from archive to street art, from forgotten to remembered. You attend a modern art exhibit called Knots of Memory. It features installations made from wool, copper, even plastic, cords. Some mimic ancient quipus. Others are wild, chaotic tangles. One is just a single red string stretched from ceiling to floor. People walk around it like it's sacred. Maybe it is. A plaque reads, "What would you tie if you thought no?" One would forget it. You stand still for a long time, and then you write your answer on a tiny card, folded and dropped into a woven box filled with others. A collective quipu of paper and hope. Back in your room, you unroll Rose's gift. You touch each knot again. Blue, yellow, red. It still doesn't translate in your head, but in your chest. It pulses, it remembers. Because here's the thing, no one tells you history isn't something you look at. It's something you carry in your shoes, your breath, your fingers. The Incas didn't leave behind books. They left threads, and now you're holding one. The wind bites a little sharper as you hike through the high valleys again, liner, now stronger than when you started. Or maybe just more used to altitude, to dust, to the sound of your own thoughts echoing off the stones. But today, your steps trace a quieter road, one where the knots changed shape, because when an empire falls, the thread doesn't vanish, it tightens, secretly, quietly, out of sight. You're here to follow the rebellion cords. After Atahualpa's execution and the Spanish conquest, the once mighty Inca world fractured. Cusco was taken. The palaces ransacked, priests displaced, records burned, roads repurposed for foreign feet. But in the shadows, the cords kept moving. Historians still argue over how organized the resistance really was. Some claim it was a flicker, sporadic, doomed from the start. Others believe it was braided and sustained, that long after the Spaniards declared victory, networks of loyalists still ran quiet messages across the valleys, still tied messages in wool, still remembered how to read them. You climb toward Vilcabamba, again once a hidden capital of Inca resistance, nestled deep in the forest like a clenched fist. The Spanish called it the last city. The Incas called it home. On the path, you find a crude marker, just a stone, wrapped in faded thread. You pause. Could it be real? Could it mean something? A local farmer sees your hesitation and smiles knowingly. "That's not decoration," he says. "That's direction." Turns out, the rebels didn't just use hidden trails. They used quipus as maps, bundled cords to signal safe paths, danger zones, and passage routes. A red string tied high meant ambush ahead. Blue string near water, safe rest, yellow. A cache of food or weapons nearby, code. Not for the colonizers, for each other. You reach a crumbled tambo, overgrown with vines. Inside, a clay jar, empty now, but once used to hide message cords. A modern replica hangs nearby. You examine it. Short cord, tight knots, an uneven spacing that forms a pulse. You feel it, urgent, brief, alive. A runner once held this in trembling hands, slipped it under tunic, moved quietly. No roads, no llamas, just the thread and the risk and the message. Historians guess these Rebel quipus didn't record tribute or census anymore. They recorded names, events, military orders, locations of Spanish patrols, and death. In some villages, researchers have found cords with knotted records of fallen warriors, some made after battles, others almost like prayers, memorials tied in wool, no tombstone, just a knot for a name, a space for a breath, another knot for sorrow. One bundle had over 70 strands. You press your fingers to the stone floor and imagine the hands that tied those strings. Were they calloused farmers, former priests, children, pretending to help with laundry while listening for orders? You may never know. In another village, you meet an old woman who tells stories passed down from her great-grandmother. One about a young Chhapaq who pretended to carry potatoes but actually carried a cord with battle strategy woven into the bag lining. He ran through Spanish checkpoints, smiled, bowed, kept moving. When he arrived, he didn't speak a word. He just handed over a sack of tubersand, a string tucked into the bottom. He never made the return trip, but the battle was won. The potatoes kept moving. Later, you explore a cave hidden beneath an old irrigation channel. A local guide lights a torch and leads you deep inside. There, painted on the rock, in faded red pigment, a rough image of a cord, not just a string. A quipu, thick, central, radiating out like a sun. Your guide whispers, "This was our church when the Spanish burned the temples. The cord reminded us who we were, even in hiding. The knots tied them together." Some rebel leaders, reportedly, carried cord speeches, quipus, encoded with entire declarations. They would untie a knot with each paragraph, remembering the words like stamp. In one story, a speech was delivered before battle entirely from memory, the speaker touching each chord like a rosary, not reading but remembering. No parchment, no ink, just wool. One researcher believes they even tied false quipusticoi messages, filled with gibberish, designed to mislead Spanish scouts. One such cord, now in a European archive, appears at first glance to be a regular census record. But when examined more closely, the spacing mimics Quechua poetry, a hidden lament, a prayer disguised as inventory. Imagine that, hiding resistance inside rhythm. You pass through a burned village. Only foundations remain. Locals say it was one of the last to surrender in the northern valley. A memorial stone stands nearby, carved with a spiral design. Someone has tied a new cord to it, red. Again, modern wool, but the knots are ancient. You don't know what it says, but you nod, just in case it's waiting for someone to listen. At night, you sleep in a shepherd's shelter on a high ridge. Wind tugs the beams, stars flicker like distant eyes. You tie a string around your wristry, knots evenly spaced. You don't know why. Maybe you're remembering someone else's memory, because that's how it worked. Rebels didn't use guns, they used memory, and memory is dangerous when it refuses to forget. You're chasing ghosts now. The morning mist curls low on the trail, winding like a serpent between broken stones and forgotten steps. You follow the path northward, not toward power, but toward absence, because this is where the thread went thin after the fall of the Inca Empire, after the fires and the swords and the stolen gold. The Chhapaq, those fearless runners of the royal road, began to vanish. Not all at once. Some simply stopped running. Others were pressed into service, used to carry messages for their new overlords, messages they didn't believe in. A few chose silence over betrayal, and some just kept running. Out of duty, out of habit, out of defiance. You're walking what locals call the Ghost Corridor, a stretch of old Qhapaq Ñan that weaves through canyons and cliffs so remote that even Google Maps shrugs and zooms out. Here, the old tambos still whisper. You pass a ruined rest house, its walls crumbled, but dignified. Inside, faded soot marks from ancient fires, a place where runners once caught their breath, gulped cold water, and checked their quipus by firelight. The air is heavy with stories. One says that even a century after the conquest, phantom chasqui were spotted darting through the night runners with no official mission, cords trailing from their belts, refusing to stop even when hailed. A child, born long after the empire's fall, once reported seeing one run by with glowing red wool and no shadow. Superstition, maybe, but you find a set of worn footprints preserved in hardened mud near a bend in the trail, small, narrow, running downhill. Who runs here anymore? You meet a man in his 80s who claims his grandfather was a runner. Not for gold, he says, for truth. He shows you a wooden chest. Inside are several quipus, modern, yes, but tied with reverence, each one wrapped around a smooth river stone. Messages for the ancestors, he says. You run them to the river. Let the water read them. You try not to cry. Further up, the road splits. One path curves toward a forgotten mining village. After the Spanish drained its veins dry, the other veers into dense cloud forest, where moss eats even the memories. Your guide, a young woman with a satellite phone and llama tattoos, grins and points left. Want to find the lost tambo. Always. The climb is rough. The fog thickens. You slip twice, catch yourself on branches, and laugh out loud at your own stubbornness. Then, like a ghost itself, it appears, built into a cliff wall, camouflaged by lichen and vines. A miniature tambo, barely big enough for one runner. Inside, a narrow bench, a bowl fused to the stone and etched into the wall. A spiral of dots. Your guide brushes away moss. They think it's a runner's tally. 1 dot per journey. Probably used knots, too. But the wool's long gone. You sit for a moment and let the silence speak. You imagine a young chasqui here, hunched in the dark, untying a cord soaked from rain, whispering its contents into memory, waiting for the moon to rise so he can run again. You check your satchel. Still there. Rosas quipu. Red, yellow, blue. You touch it. Think about what it means to carry a message you can't read but feel anyway. Because that's what the ghost runners did. They kept moving. Even after the empire stopped breathing. Some eventually found new homes in distant villages. Others vanished entirely. A few may have crossed into the jungle, taking the thread into places no map dares follow. Historians still argue about their end. Some believe they were all reabsorbed into colonial systems. Others say the last chasqui died in silence. And still others insist the tradition was never broken, just buried. Waiting, you reach a wind-swept plateau at dusk. The stones form a faint pattern, not quite a road, not quite ruins, something else. You kneel and trace it. It's a spiral again, maybe. A symbol of motion, of memory, or of refusal. Because here, where the world forgot the runners, The earth seems to remember them. Every footstep carved into the trail, every quipu tied in secret, every breath taken between one message and the next. You light a small fire, hang your cord beside it, just for tonight. You're a runner too. You've stepped into the quietest room in the world. Not a temple, not a cave, but a lab, sealed with climate control and soft footfalls. Everything here smells like glass and faint plastic. Somewhere, a machine hums with the patience of centuries. Welcome to the future of remembering. This is where the old threads come to speak again, or at least, that's the dream. You're standing in the Quipu Research Center of a major university. Inside, teams of linguists, mathematicians, and computer scientists spend their days scanning, photographing, modeling, and decoding every known quipu they can get their hands on. There are only a few hundred surviving examples in the world, maybe 1,000, if you count the fragments hidden in private collections and forgotten drawers. But even those have secrets buried in their wool. You watch as a graduate student named Alejandra gently lifts one of them from a foam-padded case. It's faded, brittle, dyed with long-lost plants. She lays it on a black background and feeds it into a 3D scanner. The machine whirs, mapping every thread twist, every knot, every fray. Fiber memory, she says softly, as though explaining to the quipu itself. We're listening. The computer screen comes alive with a virtual model, a central cord, several hanging cords, knots of different types, single, long, clustered, slipped. You squint, looks like tangled spaghetti. Alejandra laughs. It's poetry. In numeric Baston, she's only half joking, because here's the thing. Quipus were never just math. Sure, many of them use decimal systems. You can see it in the clusters of knotsum, clearly grouped in units, tens, hundreds. They were census records, tax inventories, tribute logs, you name it. If it could be counted, it was probably corded. But some quipus don't follow the rules. Some have knots where they shouldn't, or colors that don't line up, or strange directional twists that no one can explain. These are the weird quipus, the ones that won't play by the numeric rules, and they might be the most important of all. One team believes certain quipus encoded syllables, not just numbers, a kind of pre-alphabet still, purely tactile, but arranged in patterns too complex to be accidental. Another theory suggests a kind of rhythmic structure like music, that the placement of knots follows a tempo. Maybe these chords were chanted, not read, sung instead of spoken. You visit a recording studio where researchers have attempted to sanctify a quipu, assigning each knot a tone and tempo. The result is eerie, a series of ascending hums, broken by sharp clicks and deep echoes. Does it mean anything, you ask? The lead researcher shrugs. Maybe not to us, but to someone, once. Yes, you stand before a huge wall display where several quipus are digitally unspooled, each chord-mapped, color-coded. One shows clear numeric order: 87 potatoes, 65 baskets, 40 workers. Another is chaos. It features over 400 chords, each a different shade, many with directional twists alternating in tight sequence. No numbers, no patterns, just feeling. Scholars still argue what it meant. Some say it's art, others ceremony. Some suggest it's a name not of a person, but of a place, an idea, a grief, a quipu of mourning. Another display shows a recently unearthed quipu found in a burial site. It's small, just a few chords, but looped in an unusual way, forming a circle rather than hanging straight. Closed memory, says the technician. We think it marked a cycle completed, a life ended. You look closer. The knots are frayed, as though untied and retied again and again. You whisper, like someone couldn't quite let go. She nods. Back in the lab, you meet Dr. Armando Revero, one of the leading researchers. He greets you like a librarian greeting a new book, warmly but gently. He's been studying quipus for over 30 years. I still haven't read a single one, he says. Not completely, not yet. And then he gestures to a table. Laid out is the oldest surviving quipu ever discovered, carbon dated too, before the Inca, likely Wari, or even older. Over 1,200 years old. Its cords are stiff. The fibers smell faintly of dust and smoke. The colors are long faded, but not gone. People forget the Incas inherited the thread, Dr. Rivera says. They didn't invent it, they just perfected it. He points to a tiny, irregular, not halfway down one cord, that one shouldn't be there. And yet it is. He doesn't smile. Historians still argue what it means. He sits back and looks tired. But maybe we're asking the wrong question, he says, finally. Maybe it's not about reading the message. Maybe it's about respecting the memory. You leave the lab late. Outside, the night air buzzes. Streetlights cast long shadows. You sit beneath a metal sculpture, a giant quipu replica, stretching 10 feet tall, and try to think like a thread. Not in words, in shapes. If you were a knot, where would you hide your secrets? What twist would you make, so someone centuries from now might feel your heartbeat? And if no one ever decoded you, would that be a failure, or a mystery well kept? Inside your pocket, you grip Rose's cord again. It's still unreadable, but tonight it feels alive, because sometimes the greatest act of remembering isn't translating, it's carrying. You are back where you started, not literally. The trail has curved, stretched, dropped, climbed, twisted through jungle and sky. But this feeling, this weight in your satchel, this hum in your fingers, it's where the story began. Only now, you're not just walking the thread, you're part of it. The road leads to a high, wide plateau, empty, except for a single stone bench facing the open sky. Behind you, mountains curled like resting giants. Ahead, clouds rolling so slowly they seem carved from stone. You sit, you reach into your pack and pull out Rose's quipu, red, yellow, blue, still tight, still unreadable. Until now, you take out another cord. This one's yours. You found it at a market a few towns back. Just plain brown wool, nothing sacred. But your fingers have changed, and something inside you whispers, it's time. The first knot is easy. You tie it to remember Rosa, who believed you didn't need to read the thread to feel the story. The second knot is for the old woman who said, memory lives in the fingers. You try to twist yours like Hurstite, neat, full of breath. The third knot, that's harder. It's for every quipu that burned, every voice tied and untied and erased. You pause. The knot slips once before holding. You take a deep breath. Keep going. One knot for the ghost. Runner, one for the child with soup on Wednesday. One for the potatoes that carried secrets. One for the rebel who tied strategy into silence. One for the dot, Spyro etched in the rock. One for the speech unspooled from memory. One for the researcher who still hasn't solved the code, but wakes every morning and tries again anyway. You stop counting knots. They're not numbers now, they're people. And for the first time, you understand why the Inca never needed parchment, why they trusted string more than scroll. Because what they were tying wasn't data, it was dignity, the thread said. I was here. I did this. I mattered. You hold your finished cord in your lap. It's clumsy, a little uneven, but it's yours. And more importantly, it's not the last, because now you understand what Rosa meant. You'll remember when you need to. And you, do you tie your cord to hers? Just a simple loop? No fancy pattern, no translation, but together they look like something complete. You leave them on the bench, tucked beneath a rock, not as an offering, as a message, because someone will pass this way again. And maybe they won't understand your knots, but maybe they'll add their own, and maybe that's enough. You stand, stretch, start walking again. You don't need a map anymore. You've tied your place in the thread, and the thread remembers. The wind has calmed. The ground is soft beneath your feet, now not packed dirt or stone, but grass, swaying gently, thick with the scent of damp earth and warm sun. The kind of place where footsteps don't echo, they settle. This is your final stretch. Not because the road ends here, but because your thread has woven its way to peace. You've walked among empires, sat beside rebels, watched the fire of 1,000 voices flicker and rekindle. You've held the thread of memory and it has held you back. Now it lets you rest. You wander slowly through a field dotted with wildflowers. In the center stands a single wooden pole, weathered gray, a remnant of some forgotten boundary wrapped around it. Cords, red, blue, green, some dyed, some faded, some rotting, some brand new, each tied by a stranger, or maybe not strangers, because you recognize the style of Rosa's knots. You see the loose twist that one child used in school. You spot the long, steady loops like the ones you saw in the archives. Even the crooked knot you tied yourself. It's all here, a living quipu, stretched across time and place, not curated, not labeled, just remembered. You sit at its base and let the wind thread itself through your hair. For a long time, there's no need for words, but words come anyway, not out loud, just inside. Because the truth has been whispering all along. The Incas mailed potatoes with talking knots. They ruled mountains with runners and memory. They lost everything and tied it all back together again. And here you are, centuries lit. The tug of their thread. You close your eyes, think of one last person to tie for. Maybe it's someone you've lost. Maybe someone you've never met. Maybe it's you. You pull a cord from your satchel, just a scrap, no end, not at once, twice, no reason, no explanation, just a knot that knows. And with that, the journey doesn't end, it rests. Word count 2,703, 300 word wind down now. Let the road fade, let the dust settle into silence, the wind hush its secrets. The thread goes slack across your shoulders. You've traveled far, to night up cliffs and through empires, across deserts and forests, through fire and thread and breath. You've followed a string tied long before you were born, and somehow it brought you here to stillness. You don't need to run anymore, or remember everything. The knots have remembered for you. Feel the weight slip from your limbs, the thoughts unspool in gentle spirals. Let your breath come slower, deeper. like a runner reaching the final tambo, like a message gently passed from hand to hand. Close your eyes, dot in the dark. There's still motion, soft knots being tied by invisible fingers. Not for war, not for tribute, not even for answers, just because it matters that you were here. That's what the Inca knew. That's why they tied dot. So sleep now. You've carried the cord well. You've listened to what it said. And now you're part of it. Another voice in the thread. Another knot in the story. Another gentle